let's get this started. I just want to point out, I'm really excited about today. Like, because I brought a really special guest, Ulrik. I'll introduce you in a second, Ulrik. And the reason I brought in Ulrik is that he is a fucking wizard within pricing. And I'm always fascinated about the difference between like how pricing influences marketing. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Now, without further ado, do you want to give like just a brief intro of yourself, Ulrik, for the people who might not know you?
Sure. So I've before pricing, I had a bunch of other careers. I started out as a university philosopher, did that for a while. Then I started my first business, sold that, started the next, sold that. And then I was sort of starting the third business. And then my wife was like telling me that I should stop that and then help her write a book. And that was sort of the first pricing book that we wrote. So she actually got me started that. And then I just didn't say no when people asked me about pricing advice. And then I think 7-8 years later, here I am.
I always find that interesting. Like, how do people start asking you about pricing advice? Is because like within companies, you're like the one. How did that naturally happen? How does this like?
So my wife and I, we always had sort of an interest in different sort of academic fields, and one of them was behavioral economics. So thinking fast and slow, like how people make decisions, all these things. So she wrote a PhD on that and did some teaching at Harvard when we were over there. And then bringing that back, she wanted to build a consultancy around that. She worked a lot within customer journeys, especially sort of online customer journeys. And she worked for a lot of like large brands like Swarovski, Body Shop, all these larger brands. And then at one point, she was like, hey, I need to maybe publish another book. She writes a lot of books that can sort of promote the consultancy. And then we just started talking about pricing, because sort of the intuition was that pricing is considered as a number, but it's sort of more appropriately considered as a step in the customer journey, right? So something happens, I get interested, I investigate a little bit, I look at a product, then I look at the price. So there's sort of a sequence of events that sort of leads up to it. Yeah. And it's not just a number, it's also like how is it priced and how is it sort of positioned within the product. So we thought, hey, that's great. Let's write a book on that. So we published the book without any sort of plan, just like whenever you have a consultant, it's just like, hey, it's like a big business card, right? So hey, we know stuff. Yeah. And it was just the reason that I co-wrote it was that she had a publishing deal on it, but she had also just given birth to our second kid. So I think 2 months before the deadline, she hadn't written a word. So I was like, you're going to help me do this. So we just literally took like one laptop and we just took turns. So I would sit at it for like 12 hours a day. She would sit at it for another 12 hours a day, just like rotate it for like 6 weeks and then wrote the book.
I didn't know that. That's awesome. Yeah. That's really cool. That's really, really cool. Okay. That's definitely different than most people get started with whatever it is they want to do with their career. I think that's super cool. So just and what you do today, just for anyone, to advise other big companies on pricing?
Yeah. So through, I'll not bore you with how, but sort of 6 months after we launched the book, I became the preferred pricing partner for Microsoft Western Europe. So helping a lot of the large managed Microsoft accounts do SaaS pricing. And this was just like back in 2017, 18, when Asia was sort of like really, really moving, and they were trying to move a lot of their enterprise accounts who had old legacy on-premise software into the cloud. So I helped a lot with that. So that's also what I do today. I do pricing for complex B2B software solutions.
Yes, gotcha.
Yeah,
perfect. All right, I have we're having a long agenda. We actually, I don't know if you've noticed, but we actually brought a whiteboard today. So we're going to try and draw some things along the way when it comes up, but it's kind of like a winging project. So we'll see what happens, but it's going to be good. So, but one of the things I really want to talk about is like one of my pet peeves is that when I studied at CBS way back in the day, I learned about the 4 Ps. Yeah. The classic, the Porter, like you had these frameworks, and like and it used to be like this, in case you're not aware of the 4 Ps, like product, price, promotion, placement. It used to be that marketing owned all 4, or at least was part of the conversation of all 4. Personally, I don't feel like that's the case anymore, especially when it comes to pricing. Now, you've talked to a lot of companies. Like, let me ask it in this way. How many of the companies you work with have marketing had a seat at the table when it came to pricing?
So it's whenever you do like low ticket, high volume, more so, right? So especially if you do like product-led growth and so forth, it's more natural.
Yeah.
So if you do sales-led growth and high ticket, so if you sell something for like whatever, 50K, 100K, a million, usually it's sales running the show, and marketing is sort of just like, just get us leads or whatever, right? So
well, been there.
So they usually don't get a seat at the table. So and then it's more like, okay, so how do we do the website? How do we do this other thing? And then product marketing can sort of sit in between there. Yeah. But quite often it's mostly in the lower ticket, high volume cases where marketing is really at the table. Yeah. Which is a shame, but that's how it is.
That's also what I see, and I hoped you'd say something different, but that's I was kind of aware that was kind of how it's going to go. But I'm also thinking like, what do you think? Why do you think that is? Maybe why do you think like that's the case? Like for these like sales-led motions, why do we not invite marketing in? And maybe like so that's my first part, and the second part is more like, if we say that marketing should be part of it, like should they be part of the whole process of designing pricing, or where does marketing come in? Does that make sense? I'm trying to ask you.
I think so. I think the way it works is that there's a whole business, and then that is way too complex for any one person to deal with, presumably. Yes. So we sort of break it down. So it's like, okay, somebody's gonna get us leads, and somebody's going to close the leads, and then somebody's going to build the product. And
yes, classic sales process, right? And value chain.
So, and then what happens is that you then put people in charge of each step, and then they optimize for their step, but nobody actually optimizes for the whole chain, right? And I think, so it's not that marketing should own everything, it's sort of pretty much that everybody should own everything, or rather understand where they are in the process, right? So I remember the first marketing guy I hired, he was formerly from like a telco background, and he was just like, we'll just get as many people as we can to click on the link, and then regardless of what it says, like free PlayStations, tits, whatever, just get them through the link, and then on the landing page we'll say something completely different, and then we'll try to optimize for that. And it just never made sense to me. It's like, well, they're going to remember what link they clicked on, right? And then like at the next stage they're going to have an expectation, and he was just like, no, that's not how it works. And so that's always been my thing, is that what you want to look for all the way sort of through sort of the line of business, also almost like the value chain, is consistency, right? So it's like what you say in the top of funnel, like content marketing, should sort of be consistent with what you say, like bottom funnel, should be consistent with the offer you make, should be consistent with what the BDR says on the first phone call when he tries to qualify you, and so forth, and should actually be also represented in the way the product is structured, the pricing is laid out, and so forth, right?
Yeah. And I think I'm going to draw a little bit. Keep going, Ulrik, because we're going to have fun here. Go.
No, and so it's one of the easier fixes, actually, is whenever you see inconsistencies, that's also usually where you see a lot of drop off, right?
Yeah.
So let's say I have a procurement tech company that I'm helping right now. So they help people like buy smarter, right, stuff. So they help construction companies and these things like buy a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's one of these things where if their marketing says, save a lot of money on stuff you buy, whatever, right? And then their sales reps say, hey, you can have a lot more insight into your purchasing process. That's just a different thing, right?
Yes, exactly.
Might both be benefits, but now you sort of dropped all the people that just want to save money.
Exactly.
They don't care about the insights, right? So it's this consistency where just say, whatever it is, you'll just say that all throughout. And it's sort of the thing that is the hardest to change, also the slowest, is usually product. Like what is it we do and so forth. So that's sort of like, that should be where everybody sort of agrees, okay, this is what we do, this is the narrative that we can put to the market, and then we go and execute that, right?
I think it's such an interesting point, because like, don't get like, so what I tried to draw here was just like just an example of what you're essentially saying, that you have your marketing department, and the way I see it, the marketing is typically your first touch with the market. Like we're the ones that scalable. You could technically put some outbound in here, but let's just assume here. And then you have your sales. So here you talk about, hey, like the value prop you go to market with might be save money, and then they reach sales and it's like, hey, you can get some insights on your product, and then you reach your CS department afterwards maybe, and it might be completely different again, right? And I think my issue has always been that these two are not aligned, and that's also what you're essentially saying, right? And so I have a lot of, we've helped a lot of B2B SaaS, and I found this can be fixed. Like I found this, I can kind of fix on a value-based statement. Like I can create the consistency about what we talk about, but it doesn't reflect the price typically, and it doesn't enter into price discussion. That's at least what I found. It's super hard to Like, because we can talk about like, hey, these are the value props. I literally had a meeting today with a client, can't say who, but a client where we had a meeting with their sales team and talk about, hey guys, we need to align on messaging, right? But we never mentioned price. Like pricing was not a part of that messaging conversation. But what you're essentially saying is that we take these messaging framework we have and we kind of incorporate it into pricing to some extent. Make those two talk together.
Yeah, I think also what you see sometimes is that product doesn't do a good enough job of really sort of providing that content. So there's a vacuum, and then marketing basically just fills the vacuum, right?
Yes.
So if product says, look at all the cool technical features we have, like we have feature A and B and C, and everybody falls asleep, and then marketing's like, okay, I'm going to talk about saving money, right? Whatever. They're going to come up with a message, and that's sort of because you have a lack on the product side. So usually what I do actually is that I create this. I still work the whiteboard here.
Yes. Do you want this?
So I actually see product sits here.
Yes.
And maybe sort of CS or sort of fulfillment sits back here.
Yeah.
So what I usually start to do is I say, okay, so what kind of product do we have? And essentially what we're trying to do is when we price, we're actually not pricing the product, we're pricing the customer, right? So an example I use sometimes is like a train ticket. So everybody gets from A to B, but somebody wants to ride first class.
Yes.
Right? So, and then somebody wants to ride third class. That's essentially packaging, right? So say, okay, we're going to have different things we do for different customers, and then we're going to price per mile, right? So there's a pricing mechanism as well. And then each of these products has a job to be done, like a story they want to tell, right? So it's like third class is you get there dirt cheap, right?
Yes.
And first class is like, oh, look at the Instagram profile, whatever, right? so and then you can sort of, and then those things actually becomes things that you can then ask sales, hey, can you narrate this? Like, can you tell it to a client where it makes sense? And that actually should progress all the way into marketing. Like, hey, can you figure out a way to tell customers that whatever, they can get their dirt cheap, or they can whatever the Instagram profile, right? And then that sort of builds in. But that's sort of, it's the consistency across the chain that really creates the value, right?
Exactly. And that's also what I feel it's missing. Like the highlight for me is about consistency.
Yeah.
Because like that's the key word here. Because like there's no alignment around consistency, and it's usually dictated by here, typically. So a question, and maybe we can kind of draw it up. So let's say you've identified that this is a problem. There's some problem here around your pricing. This is a classic question, but where do you start? Like how would you go about changing this? Like, is it getting everyone together in a room first? Like how would you start a process like that?
It depends on what kind of company we have, right? But if it's usually we start with product.
Yeah.
And the reason we start with product is that we want to get the maximum customer value first, right? Because the customer lifetime value is going to be the budget we have to do everything else, right?
Yes.
So if we sell something for whatever, 2K, we have 2K to sort of do the sale and the marketing and also fulfill and have profits. But if we can sell something for 10K, then we have like 8 more K, right? So that means that we can now have a higher CAC, we can have more marketing spend, we can build better products, like virtuous circle, right? So usually what I do is I try to sort of figure out how products are sort of mispackaged.
Yes.
So that could be classic example in a lot of software is, hey, we started with a really good mid-market product, but now we actually have some enterprise customers and they're just not paying enough.
Yes.
Okay, so we need to come up with like a first class for the enterprise customers. So we'll invent like an enterprise tier and some premium support and some add-ons and security and compliance and all the things that enterprise customers want. And then we'll price that. And suddenly we have now made those customers worth more, right? And we can also start to then say to sales and to marketing, hey, we now have an enterprise product, so you should talk about that, right?
Yeah.
And it has a certain job that it gets done, right?
Okay.
So product is usually where we start.
Products usually where you start. Okay. When do you involve marketing in this conversation? If you ever do, it's okay to say no.
So because of the customers I work with, I usually work with more sales-led organizations, higher ticket and so forth.
Yes.
So sometimes we have marketing in there, especially if we have both high ticket and low ticket clients.
Yeah.
But it's usually I form a core team of maybe 5 people where we do pricing, which is sort of someone from product, someone from sales, someone from marketing. If they absolutely want someone from finance, and if they absolutely want someone from the dev team, depending on the technical complexity.
Yeah.
And then we need someone, if that isn't the people that can make decisions, then we need some decision makers in as well.
Yes.
Founder, CEO, whoever, right?
Yeah.
So, and then essentially what I ask them is, what is it that your customers are trying to buy from you, right? So this is sort of the old, people don't buy drills, they buy holes, right?
Yeah, classic.
So it's like, okay, so what is it that we have demand for already?
Yeah.
And how can we articulate that in packaging, right? So instead of calling something, whatever, basic advanced enterprise, we might call the procurement product, whatever, procurement control, like automated procurement and whatever, compliant procurement. Something like that really sort of says it on the tin, right? And then it's like, okay, we actually have demand for that. We can sort of recognize those signals, and then we know how to roll it out all the way through sales and marketing.
That makes sense. And here I think it's a good example of saying when you come up with these names, at least from my perspective, that's also where marketing can contribute a lot. No hard feelings. Typically, we have some good copywriters around here, right? And I don't always feel like, I remember when we did pricing at some of the companies I've been previously, we were invited in last. Like we were invited in at the final steps. Like, hey, we finalized 99%. Do you agree? I was like, yeah, but okay, sure. Can I change this box, please? Right. And then we were invited to design maybe the pricing page. Like typically that was the part of it, but not the actual intricacies of the pricing.
I think maybe that's my question for you is that marketing has maybe been delegated, but maybe has also been delegating itself through sort of the era of like pay-per-click and very sort of trackable marketing to just generate leads. Right. So it's like, okay, you're the guys that generate leads, right? So we'll tell you what we have, and then you give us some leads on it.
Yes.
Which maybe before, in whatever the Mad Men era, it was sort of more holistic, right? It was more sort of everything that you're involved on.
It's way more strategic, right? And it's actually it's a good question. So I'm guessing you're asking me why is that the case, or like
and sort of, so I think because I'm working with CMOs sometimes that have a hard time, like really insisting that not everything they do can and should be tracked, right? And that you sort of need to also build some brand and build for the long term and have some overall messaging that isn't just generating leads tomorrow, that is doing something else for the business. And I think everybody's so used to, it's just like a dial, like I'll put money in, I'll get money out, and then that's how it works.
And I think so there's a lot of aspects to this. And it's actually funny because I'm not young, but I'm a little younger. So I grew up in the era where, first of all, I grew up in the growth at all cost era, right? Which is one thing. I worked for Trustpilot and stuff. That was definitely growth at all costs. I love Trustpilot. But, and that was like all fire, all engines burning, right? I grew up with Templify and things like that. And that was before stuff like GDPR. That was before all these kind of attributions. So I actually grew up in a world where I was a little bit naive, potentially, let's say that. But I was in a world where I felt I could prove almost everything I did, right? I could literally, so I was we came from a world where you couldn't prove anything. Before I came, before 5 years before I started my marketing career, we couldn't really prove anything. And then I moved into now we can all feel like we can prove everything. Now I've grown into actually discovering I couldn't actually, a lot of the stuff I felt I could prove, I actually couldn't. But that's a different note for a different day. Now, the thing is, people get stuck in, first of all, marketing becomes like a cost center instead of a revenue center. I think that's the first thing you as a CMO have to fight. And the way you fight it, in my opinion, is talking about the metrics that actually matter. Because it's your own fault for talking CPCs. Nobody's forcing the CMO to sit there and talk about impressions and cost per click. They need to talk about pipeline. And I think no hard feelings towards a lot of B2B CMOs, especially out there. The problem is that they're not talking about the right metrics. That's the first problem. They're not talking about the right metrics. The second part is also that they don't have their tech stack in place. It's incredibly insane how many companies we talk to where the tech stack is just a mess. And now the tech stack won't solve everything, because attribution is a problem you will never get 100% a solution to. Fundamentally, the fact that you go over and whisper to me, hey, just before we started, we were talking about webinar tools, right? The fact that I said, what do you use? I use Richside, I use Livestorm, I like this, blah, blah, blah. You're going to go home now, maybe? Hopefully, I don't know. Hashtag try it. It's not because of Livestorm we filter. you might go home and be and type in Livestorm.com and sign up. That will never show up anywhere. That attribution-wise, no one will ever be able to say, "Oh shit, this is what we do." So you also have to fundamentally believe in marketing. Like there's a fundamental belief that marketing works. And we actually have a really, I can't say the name of the case, we have a really good case where we just looked at the numbers for 2024. They didn't increase, so we started working with them just before 2024, 3 months before. So we had the whole year of data. We spent approximately the same amount of money, and we didn't increase the amount of meetings booked. It's not because there was about the same target level, so we didn't increase that, but their overall pipeline for marketing increased 4x. 4x from doing a real demand motion, which is what we're trying to do. And what I'm trying to get to is that that's the number you want to talk about. Because if you're stuck, if you had just looked at the meetings booked, like which a lot of CMOs have a tendency to look at, which is MQLs sometimes, right? And depends on definitions. Then you would have looked at the case and be like, hey, SparkForce, you're shit, right? But since we could actually get into the pipeline and be like, hey guys, these are sourced from marketing. These are actually marketing stuff. This is actually marketing driven. Now, the big question becomes is that what do you do when you can't fundamentally prove that it's marketing sourced? So when somebody writes in livestorm.com, it will show up in your dashboard as what we call direct traffic. Now, if direct traffic, it used to be like the trash can of marketing because nobody could prove what it was, and we still can't. But what you can do is do all these like correlations. So you can be like, okay, when you increase this, we expect these leading indicators to increase. Now, the problem with a lot of CMOs is that they only look at the leading indicators and then they stay there forever. So they only talk about, hey, we have some brand searches or something. Brand searches typically has a like correlation between impact and output of 18 months, right? You just start doing marketing, your brand searches, there are other cases, but normally speaking, 12 to 18 months. So if you only talk about that in a year, like we would be like, we did really bad. And so I think fundamentally you have to say like, what is it we're trying to do? And what are the metrics that matches this conversation? And how can we trickle it down to something that your C-level gets? And that's my overall point. That was a long one, but I hope that makes sense.
So how do you think, so I have this thing that the lower the margins are in the business, the shorter the time horizon becomes. Right?
Yes.
So it's like if we're running for our lives, right? It's basically like trying to survive. Then everything just becomes like, what can I kill tomorrow, right?
Yes.
So but if I'm running like a super healthy business, then my timeline expands, and I can say, hey, I can do things now that I'm not going to get paid for another 2 years, right?
Yes.
We'll just do these things. And I think that's really. So in the tech space, there is this idea that people are in a hurry, right? So it's just
always.
And I
typically because those are the ones we talk to are funded, right? And there's a lot of investor pressure, right?
Yeah.
Typically.
And I think also just people are. I think I don't know if you have this sense, but I think a lot of tech entrepreneurs just wants to get it over with.
Yes.
Like, they
just want to exit, done. Then they want to do
whatever 5-10 years, and they're like, okay, now I can. And I think like. That's also why I like sometimes like second-time founders, because they kind of know that, oh, I kind of want this, right? I'm here because it's what I know how to do and what I enjoy, and that usually puts another perspective on things, right? Especially if they really know they have something that could go big, they tend to build it differently, right?
Yes. They want to do it right.
Yeah.
Like and also. But I have an interesting story. So the founder I used to work with before, Christian, he sold his previous company for a lot.
Yeah.
I think billions. And I remember when I didn't get it at first before I had my own company, because like when he started at UF, he was a billionaire. He was driving an Aston Martin, and I was like, dude, you have everything. Why are you starting this startup? And he's like, he actually told it's a little bit like derailing this, but it's still a story. And it's just he got a little bit depressed after exiting his company, because he was like, okay, what do we do now? Like now he reached a point where like, I bought all the cars, I bought all the houses, I traveled around the world. And then his wife actually came to him and said, hey, honey, you need to get out there and do something.
Yeah.
And then when he started, and he was running so fast. And I back then I was just an employee, but I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I didn't personally, because I didn't really, why are you running so fast? You're like, you have all the stuff you need. Like, why are you running so fast? But now as a founder, fuck yeah, now I get it. Now I get it. Now I understand. If one day I'm not in SparkForce anymore and we sell it or whatever happens, I will need to do something else, because otherwise I'll,
So exactly. And what else? And I think the sort of the gift of time perspective really is a superpower, right?
Yes.
Because you get to so one of the things that I have that came to me sort of very much by accident was just like realizing how much brand and reputation means, right?
Yeah.
So my first business, real estate media, completely different, sort of a lot of email marketing actually, a lot of physical events, did all that. Then I had a food production company. We had a lot of sort of visual branding, and we had a message, and it was fun, but that was mostly sort of sales driven. I was just like pick up the phone and call people. And then I started to do the consulting, and I think the consulting business was, I didn't even call myself a consultant for the first year and a half. I didn't even self-identify. It's just like a year and a half into it, like, this is what I'm doing, like full time. I should probably like get a website. I was just so that actually came like late, and then it was just these like referrals started to come. People would just like trickle in, and over time, because in the beginning I was very much sort of against this idea of being the product.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I don't want to be the product. Like, and it wasn't even for scalability. It was like I don't want to like have that kind of attention. And then like 7-8 years in, it's like, I think I can shift that, but there was a fundamental lesson in that people remember good things and tell other people, right? And then that just grows, and it grows slow, and you have no control over it. But I think still to this day, I get maybe half of my business from referrals, just from people who say, hey, you should talk to Ulrik, and we talk, and then that's how it works.
We closed a client today, and the head of marketing said to me on a call, he said, like, Casper, it's a little bit weird. It's kind of funny. First of all, I hear about you all the time. Like whenever people say, it's like, hey, you should talk to SparkForce, and said, this is the greatest, and I'm going to quote him somewhere at some point. He said, you're slowly becoming the IBM of B2B SaaS. It's like, no one ever got fired for hiring SparkForce. And when he said that, I was like, that's the point, right?
Yeah, okay.
And I think if we get back to the whole conversation about this, like, how do you prove that? Like, and I think that's where the CMOs are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because like, I don't think anyone, and I always find it, there's an educational aspect.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big educational gap.
Mm-hmm.
And here I think CMOs are lacking some sort of the power themselves. And I think there's a lot of CMOs that are not data-driven enough to be able, they don't understand the intricacies of what is going on to explain it.
Yeah.
I think that's where they're failing. All love to them, but I think that's where, because like when you go into a room to a CFO, like if you talk about the wrong metrics, or if you're talking about the right metrics and you tie it into revenue, then you're good enough. But most they can't establish that anymore. Yeah. That's at least what I'm seeing.
So let's see if you agree with this, because I have this idea that positioning is sort of the discussion that can tie a lot of these together, like 100%. Sales, product, marketing, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody can sort of get the basic concept that we sort of need a position.
Yeah.
Marketing can definitely lead that discussion and saying, hey, I can like Hail Mary it out here, but if you sort of like help me laser focus this, I can get you a lot more for a lot less, right?
Yeah.
So I think positioning really is sort of the discussion that can sort of frame sort of the collaboration between these departments.
Definitely.
And then we say, okay, so let's go all the way back into the product packaging, and then sort of figure out what we do for whom, and then marketing can say, hey, I can tell that story, and then we can also find all the, let's say, the ways that we're different, like the USPs and how we're different from competitors and so forth, and all these things, and sales can sort of just like capture the in-between, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's ideal. And I think also one of the things you can have a conversation around when you do positioning is sort of like, I think there are like 3 price positions you can have.
Should you write them down? That would be cool.
Sure.
Write those down. I'll wipe.
So you can be cheap.
Yes.
You can be fair, and you can be premium.
Yes.
Right. So, and I think that's pretty much it. And you sort of take a pick, right? So cheap is basically you should buy us because of price.
Yeah.
So if we're cheap, marketing wants to say it all the time.
Yeah.
Like we're the cheapest database solution out there. Whatever, save a lot of money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right?
And I also feel like that happens a lot in non-B2B world, like in e-commerce, like Power, those kind of companies, right?
Aldi,
yes,
cheapest, right?
Cheapest out there,
all
right?
Lead with cheap, right?
Exactly.
So that makes sense. And then fair basically is, hey, we are going to charge a fair price. There's going to be a good sustainable margin on it. It is correlated to the value, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then the final one is premium, which is almost again, you should buy us because of price, but because of all the things that come with a premium product. So this is sort of where we might only be a little better than whatever the next best thing, but you're the kind of person that can't afford the risk, right? No. So you're just going to go top shelf all the time, and it says a little bit about who you are as well as about what you're buying, right? So there's a signal in it along with the product, right? And I think what people mess up is that they try to in between them, like they're sort of cheap, or they're fair but with a discount, or they're not premium enough, right? So what people miss is that there is this distance between these is actually quite huge, right? It's miles apart, right? So people will say, well, premium's got to be like whatever plus 50% of fair. Usually, like it's 10x, right? And if you can have that discussion and say, hey, if we have, let's say, 3 different products, we can position them differently, right? We can have an entry product that's cheap, and then we can have something that is fair, and then we can have something that is just like 10x for the super premium, and then we can sort of skim the market. This is almost like a demand curve, right? You can say, hey, we'll get a few customers to buy this because they absolutely just want the super premium version, and they're willing to pay a lot more for it, and then we can get a fair amount into this, and then we can just capture low market here, right? And that's really what packaging does. But also it means that marketing should and have a job in preparing the customer for the price point. Right. So if you buy whatever, a Birkin bag, right? Yes. You kind of know that when they present you with the price, you can't walk away because you've already been so far into the journey that whatever the tag is, you just fine. Of course, I'm going to pay this, right? No, that's true. And that's because marketing has sort of told you this is super expensive, right? So if you're not the kind of person that wants to buy a super expensive bag, like don't bother like browsing, right? So that means that they are sort of trying to prevent that sticker shock, right? So they're preparing the customer like, okay, and the same thing with you go to whatever high-end consulting or something else, there will be some sort of preparation in the customer journey that say, hey, this is not cheap. And so if you're trying to buy cheap, we should stop. So we're sort of sorting away the leads, disqualifying them in the marketing process before we even get to the point where we disclose the price.
Love it. I love this. Yes. Okay, quick. I have 2 questions to follow up to these. So first of all, how do you feel? So you talked about packaging here. I think that's also not to use ourselves as a good example, but that's kind of what we do ourselves as a service, which is a little bit unheard of. But how much do you feel like anchoring plays a part in this? Okay, so in marketing, we talk a lot about price, having these price anchors, because essentially, typically, let's say you have these 3 packages, whatever. You kind of have one that you really want people to pick. Like you have, and typically, not gonna lie, in SparkForce's case, we really, don't get me wrong, we also want them up here, but this is the one we try to anchor towards. How do you feel like, is that different from these 3?
No, so what are the prices of your packages now?
6,500 euros, 10,000, and 15.
Okay.
And maybe we haven't consulted Ulrik on this, so maybe we'll learn something now.
So the first thing I say, you need to move them farther apart.
That's a great point.
So if you said whatever 25, here, let's say somebody would still buy it, right?
Yes.
So that's just like you have internal consistency here, right?
Yes.
So it kind of like, oh, this seems like that's a lot, but this is, oh, that's not a lot. Okay, I'll do that, right? Yes. If this is too close, you sort of waffle. The other thing is that you can have an external reference point. Like so for example, you see all these like calculators, like price calculators. So okay, I'm buying a coffee machine for the office, and then the salesperson will be like, okay, how many people are you? We have 200 people in the building. Okay, so he'll say, okay, so your coffee machine now takes whatever 2 minutes to produce a cup of coffee. So that is, people drink 2 cups a day, so that's 800 minutes of like, and what's the salary of your, and he'll map it out, right? Yes. Our thing does it in whatever 30 seconds, right? Yeah, exactly. So you save all this and then blah blah blah. So, and that's creating an external reference point for what it is. Like, it's still a cup of coffee, but now I'm producing a reference point on the value of the speed of the machine, which is what I'm trying to do, right? So for this, you can of course say, hey, we are a revenue generation machine, so we're going to do like all these things for you. Yeah. We're going to get you all the revenue. We're going to position you these things and so forth. And then the more you can do that, the easier it's going to be for you to actually command the price points, right? You can also say, hey, 25K, that's sort of the same price as you would have for, let's say, 2 marketing guys, maybe, right?
Exactly.
So you can reference it to something external, and hey, we're actually going to be a team of whatever, 8 that's doing a lot of things for you. So we have a lot more like deep competencies or skills to apply to your case than if you just hired 2 guys. That still are expensive, right?
Yes.
Fully loaded. So you can reference this to something else where people say, okay, so it's just 2 guys, right?
Yes. You create some sort of reference point for them, right?
Yeah.
They can kind of, because this might seem like a huge number, but if they kind of compare down to, it's like hiring 2 people, then suddenly, okay, then it makes sense for them.
Sure. So for the kind of companies I work with, usually they're around, I don't know, 100 million US ARR. And that's also at the point where they start to really hire dedicated pricing teams. Sometimes they do it a little bit before, but that's sort of a good, so it's often something I help with. And at that, especially if you're US based, the on-target earnings for like a lead pricing guy in a company like that is around 300K.
Yeah.
That's usually what they're paid.
Yes.
And they usually need an analyst as well to like do grunt work, right?
Yeah.
So you're looking at like fully loaded for just those 2 people running that thing is like 500K a year at least, right? And then you need to also like involve the rest of the organization, right? And that's often in the range where I charge, right? I charge sort of 2, 3, 4, 500K, depending plus on the variable fee. So basically I say, hey, like we'll get this done now at a much higher quality because we've done it 100 times.
Exactly.
And then you can hire really solid guys to like keep it going.
Yeah.
And you know, in a year from now, so it's just like you just front load that cost now and then blah blah, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So that means that they're now reference pointing the sticker price to something else. So like, oh yeah, I need to do that, but now I'm just gonna like pay that now, get more quality. We'll get started like in 2 weeks instead of whatever the hiring is for like 4 months with the other thing, and then we get going. So whenever you have something like that that works, you can just push it into the marketing, like top funnel.
Yes.
And that's just essentially just like, hey, let's, from the same job to be done, just run enough creative to test what works until we have something that hits, and then we double down on that.
Exactly. Fucking love that. Okay, this was great. Second question, because this is for all the marketing fans out there. I know this is kind of, it's probably like when I have the podcast Marketing Corner with Jennifer. One of the questions we've been asked the most is about transparent pricing.
Yeah.
Do you show your pricing or not? So just for fun, like of all the clients you have, how many of those have transparent pricing? And here, transparent, what I mean with that is like you can go to your website and actually figure out what the product or service costs.
Yeah, sure. So the way I think about it is that first rule is that if your pricing is for whatever reason so complex that you can't explain it on a pricing page, don't, right? That's just.
What could be an example of that? So there's some complexity.
So that could be something like the way that we build our whatever trading platform is that you have to make 25 different product configuration choices.
Yes.
And then we're going to price you based on whatever, 10 different metrics. And some of it is going to be like third-party pricing that we flow through, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it can be hugely complex.
Yes.
So unless you do that and have huge volume, like AWS or like cloud computing, where you have very complex pricing, which nobody really like. It's almost like a master's degree to figure that out on its own. Don't communicate it, right? Because it unless people are forced to buy it, it's just they will give up, right?
Yeah.
But if you can explain, you say, hey, the way this works is that we're going to have a flat fee of 20K, and then we're going to have a whatever price per location you load onto the software, whatever, if you're doing like retail software, and that's how it's going to work. And it's going to be 500 a month extra, right? So 10 locations, 5K plus the 10, 15, that's how it works. You can explain that on the pricing page. Now, if you have a lot of inbound leads, and that's usually how they'll go on the pricing page, they'll look it up, then they will essentially self-qualify on your pricing and then reach out, right? So that's sort of step one, where you can say, okay, so if you are so bad at marketing that you, for whatever reason, have gotten people to your pricing page without really getting interested in the product first, then you might lose something. But if actually your funnel works and they arrive here at the appropriate time, sure, they'll qualify, and now they'll go away and not waste your time, or they'll actually engage in it like an actual discussion with you, right?
Fun anecdote to add on that, because there's I had a few sales calls, potential leads come in today, and one of them we went and showed up at the meeting, and then the first thing she said, unfortunately, the CEO won't be joining today because we saw the pricing, and that's actually not within our budget. So a little bit unfortunate to have the meeting booked, but if I think it's just a point of proving and saying like, that's all right, then let's not waste our time.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So it pre-qualifies, and that for me has always been a huge thing. Right.
Yeah, and then and the extra thing on that is that if you think about outbound sales, or let's say more enterprise sales. So let's say that you have that example from before, like what did I say, 20K fixed and then 500 per location.
Yeah.
Let's say that someone comes through the door with whatever 1,000 locations.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're going to go through like the whole process of quoting a client like that and doing these things, and then you're going to quote them 500,000, 510,000, right?
Yeah.
Something. The good thing about that is that that client now knows that you're giving them the same price as the other clients because you have committed to that publicly, right? So the pricing page becomes your reference point for the discussion, where you can now tell the client like, hey, why should I give you a different price than all the others when this is our public pricing?
Yes.
Which also means that you can even put your discounts, what I call structural discount, on your pricing page. You can do something like, hey, whatever, the first 20 stores is this price, up to 100 is this price, whatever. So that when you quote them, maybe you don't quote them 500K, maybe it's like 250 at sort of the size they're at.
Yeah.
But then you can sort of see, hey, I'm quoting you the same price as everyone else, and your volume discount is already baked in, right? And what happens there is that that customer will now much less aggressively negotiate the price.
Yes.
Because they can see that, oh, to get an even better discount, they would need to be whatever, twice as big. Something like that, right?
And it's so fun. This is and not to use ourselves again, but this is exactly how I felt. Yeah. Like, and here I can give you a real example. I have no worries, we're not a huge SaaS, but before in the first 6 months of SparkForce, we didn't have transparent pricing. We were just getting started figuring out our pricing point. I had to negotiate every single deal. Every single deal was a back and forth. Hey, what about this? Can we squeeze blah, 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 blah. After we launched transparent pricing, I think I've had to negotiate 2 or 3 times where people, and when I say negotiate, it's more like people have asked, hey, what's the wiggle room? Can we change things? Blah, blah, blah. But the other times people are like, that's the package. That's what we're going for. So it completely changes the game.
And if you have more complex pricing that you just can't put on your website like you do, so for example, my pricing is a little bit more complex. I have some variable fees and performance stuff and all that. What I do is whenever I'm in that process and I have customers that ask me like, hey, can you give me like some idea of where we are just with pricing? I usually tell them the last 3 projects I sold.
Yeah.
I'll say, hey, I'll say the last one I sold was like this size, we quoted this size, quoted this, and then that's the range.
Yeah.
And I don't need to think about it because I just tell the truth.
Yes.
And then they can say, okay, so, that's the range. And they can sort of see where they fit in most likely.
Yes.
And then they get an idea of where they are, right?
Yes, exactly. A lot of the pushback, I always said like, and here, this is my take, so please take it for what it is. I always felt like there's a lot of excuses for not doing transparent pricing. Because like a lot of people have a tendency to say, oh, but it's too complex. As an example, other agencies, right? Where it's like, it's too complex. But I'm like, it's not complex to price Google ads. Like there's difference between the cases, but I have a pretty good idea of what it takes.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I've always found like that at the end of the day, the difference between, and of course there's the aspect of if you can do it or not, but there's also the aspect of saying, if you don't, it's just I felt it's always like a tool to charge more. Mm-hmm. The reason you don't have transparent pricing is a lot to say, because then when that fat enterprise client comes along, then you can tune it up, right? Mm-hmm. You can chunk it up. So it's never at the benefit of the customer. It's always at like, is there any what I'm trying to say, I don't feel like there's ever a case where the customer wins with not having transparent pricing. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I'm challenging.
Well, so you could say in those instances where your product for whatever reason just requires someone to really narrate the value. So pricing will turn off, so they sort of lose an opportunity, right?
Yes.
So that would be it. But I think actually you have an in-between version with disclosing pricing, and that is that you can disclose, for example, just the model, right? So you can say something like, our price is like a fixed fee plus a price per location.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily give the numbers. But now now people know, okay, there's going to be some sort of base, and then I have 20 locations, so it's going to be some number times 20.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And then you can just disclose it here. And this actually is really good at also weeding out a lot of the customers that just want like something basic, or maybe they don't want per location because they are whatever, something else, like it's irrelevant for them. Or if it's something like if you charge, especially if you charge like AUM based or percentage of revenue or price per lead or something, some people just turned off, some people really turn on, but that can actually be enough to get people past that stage and just move in anyways.
Love it. Big fan. All right. Really cool. Okay. Let's see how we're running on time. All looks good. Let me see. We didn't have any questions so far. Okay, good. Let's keep moving on. Thanks for staying with us, folks. Please stick along. All right. So I think we covered a lot of stuff I really want to talk about. So I'm really glad. But are there so I kind of one thing I wanted to talk about is also like because we do a lot of split testing, like A/B testing, all these kind of things for clients and other things. But is there any like do you ever do cases where like do you ever split test pricing? Like do you ever how do you test if the pricing is right? Like, that's kind of what I'm asking. And to go back to the right audience, that also ties in. But let's start there.
So if you have high volume, low ticket, so you can sort of run the math on when you would have something that is statistically significant, right?
So that'd be like Canada, right? That would be high volume, low ticket.
Something low ticket. Yeah. So something like that, where you have, you need to usually have like thousands of opportunities, like ad bats every like recently 2 weeks, something like that, to really sort of split test. And then if you want to, what I usually advise people to do is that you need to sort of split test sort of larger differences. So don't split test like whatever 100 and 110. Like split test 100 and 150, because the signal is going to be a lot stronger, right?
Yes.
So if it's 150 just converts to the same as 100, like great, like just move there and then you can do it. And then as soon as you get something where it starts to drop off, then you can like reduce the increments, like make smaller tests around that last price point that seemed optimal, and then that's how you get there, right?
Okay.
And you can of course run, if you have super high volume, you can run several of them at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So I had, and you can of course also run it in different locations, right? So where sometimes is where it starts to break down. So I had an app customer that was, I think technically B2B, but in reality it was sort of mostly B2C, but they had tens of thousands of customers. And I remember we just ran a split test in Australia for them. And it just turned out that they could just triple prices there. For whatever reason, maybe they didn't have a lot of competitors or whatever, they could just, we just like added 50% and again and again and again. It's just like, okay.
But you did it in increments, right?
Yeah, so I think we ran sort of 4 B. So we had the control, then we ran 2 lower, and then we ran one at 50 and one at 100% higher.
Yeah.
And then the 100% higher just like made the most money, and then we ran like I think another 50 and 100 above that.
Yeah.
And then we sort of found the price point on it. But it's just one of these things where that's relatively fast and easy to do if you have that kind of volume.
Yeah.
App stores and other things can make it a little bit more complicated. So these guys mostly actually transacted through their website.
Yes.
But that's how you do it. But actually, sometimes if you have app stores, what you do is you split test with different countries. Like okay, let's say that we believe that Canada and like US is the same, and then we'll do one price in Canada and another in the US, right? And then like just pretend that they're the same market, right? But that can actually give you some of the insight. For sales-led organizations, it's a little bit more difficult because what you want to do is you want to have a list price, and you say whatever 1,000 per location, and then you want to create first a structural discount. So you say, okay, we're going to discount down to whatever 500 per location at a million locations.
Yeah.
And then you might want to say, okay, if we really think that these prices are aggressive, like these are at the highest we could go, then we test prices by then giving our salespeople the mandate to discount. Right. So you say, okay, we think that the right price.
You start really high and then you give them.
So you do sort of what we call price discovery period, right? So you say, let's say you price 100 today, and you just find out that that's way too little.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, we think we could maybe go to 200.
Yes.
But then you say, hey, maybe let's try and list price it at 3, and then give the sales guys the mandate to discount down to 180, right? And then you run that for a sales cycle, something like that.
Yeah.
And then you see if you have multiple salespeople and you incentivize them correctly, meaning the people who use the discount the least gets the most commission, then you can sort of see what is possible, right?
Yeah.
Because some people are always going to use the maximum discount because they're just.
Sometimes bad salespeople also exist.
Yeah. So then you can, and then what you do is you then either reduce list price or reduce the amount you can discount until you get into a very narrow range, right? So you work in there over a couple of sales cycles.
Perfect. Fucking love that. All right. A question here. So I think that's really, really interesting. But how does again? Because one thing I want to talk about is also you brought in a kind of idea I want to kind of follow up. How do you ever feel people are worried? Like, because like I remember I talked to one client who also used to work with you, what I'm mentioning, really cool guy, and he was like, you were almost sometimes like his shrink, because like he was gonna do this like price change, and he felt it was the right, but it was like, are we sure we can do this? Because like what happens if you roll out one thing is a price change to new customers, but what about the existing customer base you already have?
Yeah.
Like, how do you convince stakeholders that, hey guys, internally, we're gonna ramp up, we're gonna triple the prices for all internal, and that's not gonna cost us, but it's okay that we lose a few clients. Is it a pure math of just saying we can afford to lose this many?
No, so pure math won't work, and we can afford to lose this many doesn't work either, because that's just the math, right?
Yeah.
So I recently had a CEO reprice their largest customer from 350K a year to 1.8 million.
What?
And so
teach me.
Okay. Here's how you do. So the thing is that if we had just like spreadsheeted him at the beginning, say, hey, you can do this, he would have said, probably not, and he wouldn't have done that meeting. And even if he had done that meeting, he wouldn't have executed that price point, right? He would just have folded, right? So what you need to do is you need to just realize that if the end goal is that the CEO walks into the room with that account and does that, right? 6x the price, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Then what needs to have happened before that so that he has that confidence?
Yes.
Right? And I call that process solve for risk, because you basically sort of reverse engineer the ability to have that negotiation at the end, right?
Yeah.
So the step before that could be, oh, he just did it for his 5 like second largest accounts. Like if you just done that, okay, you can go to the big dog and say, hey, this is what's up, right?
Yeah.
And then what needs to have happened before that? Well, then maybe you repriced like the whole long tail, like all the smaller accounts. Okay, great. Like, all right. So, but how do you get the guts to do that? Well, maybe you just sold it in the market at a higher price for a while, and you saw that it worked, and the market was like okay with it. Like so if you can sell it in the market, then surely you can go to the easiest, lowest risk customers and say, hey, you need to pay this too.
Yeah.
And if they then reprice, then you go to like the medium hard ones, and if they reprice, then you go to the hard ones at the end, right?
Gotcha.
And then before you launch into the market, then you can run validation interviews, and you can run your spreadsheets, and you can do all the things. And then but at the beginning, it just starts with like the 5 people in the room agreeing sort of how to be consistent with what we sell to whom and what the value and the job to be done is, right? But that whole process is actually a de-risking process. And the reason it also is de-risking is that the 5 people in the room, marketing, sales, product, development, finance, are the necessary ones because they have different perspectives on the customers and the market and so forth.
Yeah.
So by getting them to just say, hey, we're not going to leave until we gear something, right? And then when they do, you have a really good sense that this is going to get implemented and people are aligned, and we might get somewhere with this. And then you can go to the rest of the organization, and then you can go to the customers and to your resellers and all these things.
And how do you it's just a practical thing. Like, how do you convince a customer to pay what was 6 times more? Like,
depends on. So you can say, hey, listen up. You've actually been underpriced for years, right? So that's maybe step 1. So thank you for like the long history and the business and so forth.
Yeah.
So in this case, it was actually in like a lot of legacy tech, and they have done a lot of like bespoke development for them and these things. So they've just been underpriced. So we're just like, hey, we actually we ran some competitor mystery shopping and just found that some of their competitors would be like way higher priced than them. Yeah. But then we also saw that this account just couldn't really move, right? So we ran sort of essentially a churn risk analysis. So okay, like they have nowhere to go. Like, and it isn't that we then exploited that. We just say, hey, for the size you have, you didn't have to pay list, and we're not really willing to give you that much of a discount, because why should we, right? If you came through the door today, you would pay this price as a new customer, right? So there's no reason that we should like give you the discount just for the heck of it, because you've actually already had, like a vastly underpriced product for a while. And the second part of that is that whatever you charge your customer becomes the budget you have to sell to customers, but also to deliver more value. So you can say, hey, by charging you 1.8, I now have 1.5 more to develop better product for you, right? Yeah. And I'm not going to put it all in my pocket, right? I'm actually going to, so you can say, sometimes the narrative that we use, especially when we do a lot of like heavy lifting repricing, is to say, like, we have been surviving for a while at this low price point. It's actually underpriced, and that isn't consistent with like the mission we have for this company, right? We want to do something else with the product. So now we have to reprice you to like a reasonable level, and then we'll reinvest that to really take you on that journey with us to where we want to go with the product.
And it's also a bit like a positioning play to some extent, right? Like as we brought to the, okay, that's a really good point. I should try that. All right, we're slowly running out of time, why this is so fun. So I'm gonna try and steer this. I want to talk like one thing. I want to go a little bit back to, and that's because like before we started, you also talked a little bit about a pet peeve you have about the correlation between LTV and CAC. Would you mind explaining that? Like what's your issue with that relationship? And also, just for everyone listening, let's start with LTV over CAC, like what it is, and then let's start why the issue is. I'll let you explain.
Yeah, so like lifetime value, LTV, is all the money, and you can say lifetime gross profit, you can say lifetime value, depends a little bit on what kind of business you're in. Yes. If you have a margin of 100%, then it's the same.
Yeah.
But you can say, okay, if I charge my customer 100 a year and I have them for 10 years, then my lifetime value is 1,000.
Yes.
Right? On average. And then you can say, well, how much does it cost me to then get a customer? And if it costs you 100 to get a customer, then the ratio between the two is 1 to 10, right? So for every $1 or I spend, I can get sort of 10 of revenue, right?
Yes.
And then it spreads over time. So, and what happens usually is that you see it's a really key unit economic that speaks to how fast you can grow, right? Because if you have an LTV CAC of 3, then like a third of all the money has to go into sales just to make it work, right? But if you have an LTV CAC of 20, then whatever you almost push into sales just creates explosive growth. Right?
Yes.
And so everybody's sort of trying to like get a good ratio. And my argument is that people are considering them equals, but they're not. And the thing is that LTV is actually infinite. So you like in theory, LTV could be whatever number you could dream of, right?
Yes. And
CAC can always just be 0, right? Yes. And then, so if you had this sort of scenario where the CAC is 100 and your LTV is 1,000, you can say, okay, I could get a better ratio by like squeezing my CAC down to 50, and then I'll get the 1 to 20 ratio. But you could also just triple your LTV, right? Yes. And if you then triple your LTV, because most marketing functions as an auction for attention, you say, hey, if I triple my LTV to 3,000 and then I 10x my CAC to 1,000, then I'm going to get pretty much all the customers, and probably my margins on the product are much better because I just raised prices a lot, which means that net I actually earn more profit per customer than before, right? But that suddenly means that you can just outperform in your marketplace from a marketing perspective, backed by a higher LTV, right?
Exactly. Thank you. I've been trying to preach this kind of same stuff. So but I'm so glad, because like what I also feel like, and I think like it's also, and this is also the nature of what marketing is, because I feel like we're often relegated to only talk about CAC, because it's not, we don't often, I found that, at least from my perspective, I don't often have a big influence in LTV, because LTV is influenced by like, churn, like stuff like how long do they stick around, right? And that's like customer success and other aspects, how good is the product development, all these kind of things. And that's sometimes, a lot of the cases, out of marketing's hand, and then you're relegated to just silo in on CAC. And then the problem also becomes that it's a race to the bottom. Yeah. Like, and CAC is usually, the biggest problem with CAC is also that it doesn't take everything into account. Like there's so many, like CAC, for instance, when you do brand building, and what we just talked about, demand gen and these kind of things that improve, that has a 5-year cycle, right? Like have you like a 5-year perspective, you're investing $1 today, you will yield a 20x return, but it won't do it today, it will do it in 5 years. Yeah. That's a good investment, right? But you won't be able to prove it. And then typically marketing doesn't stick around after a year. Yeah. I think one of the things I'm also seeing is that, this is more like a general question, or like more like a general thing, is that marketing has the lowest tenure of any C-level. Like, I don't know if you knew this, but lowest tenure. So the CMO is actually the person who sticks around the least amount of time. Yeah. And typically the perspective, like you can say the product is longer perspective, but technically marketing has the longest perspective because what they do won't matter today, but will matter down the line, right? And I think this is just my hot take. If you get marketing to be a part of that pricing and be part of the LTV talk and increasing LTV, because we can actually influence a lot, right? Then you can actually make marketing way more valuable, but proving it, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
That's what I found.
No, I think you're right. So I think the goal should be to increase both, right? Yes. Increase LTV and increase CAC, but of course not at the same rate, right? No. So we want to sort of triple LTV and double CAC or something like that, right? And then the rest is just almost like a strategic play. You can sort of see whatever channels you're dealing with and so forth. Like, how do we actually want to play here? Yeah. Because at a certain LTV, you're gonna max out on your channels too soon, like your CPC, whatever, right? Yes. You say, hey, like if we pay more for the keywords, we just like it doesn't work, right? Exactly. So. But then you can say, hey, so that's actually so with the procurement software I mentioned before, that's exactly that situation. They just maxed out on the keywords. They're spending whatever 30K like a month on or something like that. And so we're just like, okay, but we like have room to whatever massively increase your annual contract value on this. So let's just do that. And then actually instead of, and that's another thing is that often an LTV actually opens up another channel because now they can start to do outbound, 100%. They can start to do content, they can start to do other things that makes maybe more sense, but only at that higher lifetime value. And it's so funny because like that's exactly the same. So whenever I have initial conversations, it's actually one of my key questions I always ask about is what's your LTV? Yeah. And I don't need like, hey, it's exactly this number. I just need like an estimate, like because typically people don't always know. But the reason asking, because like if you have like a really high LTV, then it opens up for stuff like account-based marketing approaches, where fundamentally just speaking, like ABM is you can just look at it like this: the higher the LTV, the higher resources you can dedicate. Because like the more you can afford to pay for a client, the more it's worth. And we have a client where we spend a lot of money and they won 7 clients last year from our efforts. And those 7 clients tenfolded. Like I can't even remember the exact number. Way worth it. Yeah. But it was like they didn't close. I think 5 of them closed in Q4. Yeah. so it was like the entire year looked like shit, and then when we got to Q4, boom, worth it, right? And I think that conversation also initially to have to like set expectations, also be like, hey guys, your LTV dictates, as an example, because like it also dictates if you have we have some clients where their LTV is like, or like the ARR, the annual contract value, ACV, is maybe like $1,000, super low. Then we're like, it's not necessarily feasible we can be on LinkedIn as a platform, because the platform is just expensive. Like it's hard to drive a lot. It might be possible, but in this case, I don't think it's possible. We need to use other channels. So it dictates channel choice. Yeah, and I think so. So it's like just making me think like the perfect, maybe the wrong exit strategy. I don't know, but there's also like you spend the first 5 years just building product, and if you're a service provider, you just like spend the first 5 years just building your skill set, right? Just just be able to like deliver value really well. And maybe that takes 10 or 15, depending on what you're doing, right? And then you just need to spend like the minimal amount to get some business, like totally like end of funnel, just like, please give me money. Right? And then as soon as you're surviving on that, then you actually need to go and spend everything else that you can on the way top of funnel, just like brand, reputation, content, all these things, and then just wait, right? Because you have a solid product, and then it just needs to trickle down. And then it just trickles down and suddenly it builds and like, oh, it's a snowball and like overnight success that took 10 years and all these things. Exactly. And then 1 to 2 years before you want to sell it, then you move everything back to end of funnel again, and you just ramp the heck out of it. You say, hey, it's exploding. And then you ship it off to the next guy. Right? Yes. And that happens way too much. You have no idea. Yeah. We literally have a client the other day. We're like, hey, we can't say, but IPO potential. And they're like, yeah, so we're going to cut budgets because we might IPO within 6 months. Okay, cool. So, all right, we're running out of time. I could ask so much stuff, but we're running a little out of time. So I want to ask, like, I want to do a little bit of time for you to shout us, but I also want to, like, what's your, like, if you could give people 3 things today, like, if you could sum it up to 3 things that you feel like people educational-wise are missing, like a gap you would love to have people understand.
Like we talked about LTV, that could be LTV CAC, that relationship. But is there anything else that you would love to people leave from here today that maybe it doesn't have to be 3, but you get my drift? Anything you're like, please get this, or
yeah. So I think sometimes you actually want. So sometimes people have this idea that price comes after the value, and sometimes you want to sort of flip it. You want to say, what do I need to do to 10x my prices?
Yeah.
Right. And then maybe you don't 10x it, but so if you're sort of big package, like the premium one had like a 15K price point, just sitting down with like 2 or 3 people in the team and say, hey, if we were to charge someone like 150 a month, like what would that look like?
Yes.
And maybe you'd come up with like a whole new way of providing value to some clients, and maybe that wouldn't end up at 150, maybe it would just end up at 50K, but that would still be like a 3x of where you have. So I think sometimes you just need to do that and then just like move towards that price point. And it also becomes, I just see some entrepreneurs and businesses just naturally do that. They just figure out that, you know, we solve for the price. Like, okay, we need to make more money on our customers, so we need to sort of figure out how to do that, rather than just like, let's figure out to build some value and then we can charge them later. So that's, I think, the one thing. And then the second thing is actually just the consistency. Yeah. It's just that we talked about at the beginning. It's just like, just make sure that customers are like, there's no surprises. Whatever the thing I read on LinkedIn or the content piece or what I hear at a webinar is also sort of the thing that's on the landing page and is in the white paper and is what I hear the sales rep saying and what the product is giving me when I'm opening it up, and sort of what I'm reinforced with from customer success. Like with that, you just build like a higher quality pool of customers because they're there for the right reason, right?
Yes. Like
through the sales process, when they use the product and everything else.
Yeah. And it also gets easier to close. Like a lot of people have a tendency to forget when there's consistency, cohesiveness, then it's just a lot easier to close the deals.
Yeah.
Right. They're more well informed as well. Yeah. Right. And they agree, they're aligned on what they're buying. So love it. All right. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Ulrik, for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I think this format worked. Please tell us. But I think
this was great.
I think this was awesome.
Went above and beyond.
Yeah, it was really good. I really thank you so much, Ulrik, and thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll send the recording. Sorry for the technical issues. Where do people find you, Ulrik, normally? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Willingness2pay.com, our website. Could be a good thing, or like stalk me on LinkedIn, also fine.
LinkedIn, always good, right? Yeah, and you know, guys, you can always find me on LinkedIn. So, but thanks for tuning in, guys, and thanks for coming, Ulrik. Absolute bomb. Love it. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.